Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we're going to be diving in to the Eldar Forgeworld units for 10th edition. So, just like the video that we did with the Eldar Index, I want to do the same thing with the Forgeworld units because I didn't really give an overview of these in my last live video. So this is a live video, so if you hear any mistakes or any pauses, of course that is because it is live and I can't go back once I say something. So I've actually recorded this video before, but I made a huge error and the recording equipment that I was using was not good. This is updated recording equipment. I just purchased it, so let me know how it sounds and, just give me general feedback on what I can do to make it better. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive right in. Now, the first unit we want to look at is the Wraithseer. So the Wraithseer is extremely good, and I think it's going to be more relevant when we get our balanced data slate in January, and here's why. The Wraithseer is primarily an anti-infantry monster. And right now, there's not much of a use for anti-infantry monsters, right? It comes with a heavy flamer base, Destructor. Its ability, battle shocks enemies, so usually pretty good against infantry or stuff like that, hordes, stuff with lower leadership, not really great against elites, typically. And its melee weapon is really where you start to look at it in a different light, in a really powerful light, because it has the sweep and the strike. Now, the strike isn't that great. The strike is really just a worse version of the Ghostglaive from the Wraithlord. Strike 10, AP -2, damage 3. The damage 3 is good, but, it does have precision as well, so it can kill characters pretty easily. Has anti-infantry 2+, which is kind of redundant. If you're going against infantry, most infantry is not going to be toughness, 6 or above, unless you're going against stuff like Custodes. And in that case, it is pretty effective. If you're going against anything toughness 7, it's good. But again, the damage 3 is kind of iffy, right? Against Custodes, at least. But if you look at the Ghost Spear Sweep, it has 12 attacks. With strength 7, AP -1, damage 1, anti-infantry 2+, which makes it really powerful at clearing hordes away. So that strength 7 is normally going to be wounding most toughness 4 things on 3+, but because it has anti-infantry 2+, it actually wounds it on 2s. So this is really good, especially when you consider the Wraithseer's weapon skill is 4+. Now, as for its ranged weapons, because it's an anti-infantry monster, I just don't think the Wraithseer D-Cannon is that good. It's essentially just a longer ranged Wraith Cannon. And if you need anti-large, Wraithguard are currently better. I don't know about after the data slate. Who knows what they'll do to Wraithguard. I don't think they'll hit them this hard, though, to the point where they're, useless. But anyway, the Wraithseer D-Cannon has devastating wounds. It is decent, but it's just nothing better than a Wraith Cannon. It's not really that effective. And I've actually given Wraith Cannon to these guys in my all-monster list that I ran a couple weeks ago, and the Wraith Cannons really didn't do a whole lot, or D-Cannons, I should say, really didn't do a whole lot with the Wraithseer. However, the Bright Lances are the superior choice for anti-large. If you want that Bright Lance shot for those anti-large, you can go for that. However, if you want to just keep this thing an anti-infantry monster, I would suggest putting a Shuriken Cannon on it for sustained hits, or putting a Aeldari missile launcher on it, because then that way you can either get the anti-large shots, you can get decent anti-large, or you can get good anti-infantry. So either way, both options are good. I think scatter lasers, unfortunately, just don't have the hitting power, don't have the strength to deal with the higher toughness hordes like orcs, but Shuriken Cannons are very good. I recommend Shuriken Cannons in most situations, if you want this thing to be anti-infantry. So the Wraithseer, unlike the Wraithlord, is very much going to be a midfield bully to infantry units. The Wraithlord is something that, likes to protect your more fragile units in the back line, has kind of a multi-purpose role. The Wraithseer definitely wants to be in the enemy's face, doing some damage to infantry. Okay, so that's the Wraithseer. Oh, and 5+ invulnerable save, I forgot to mention this. It does have a 5+ invul, makes it tougher against things like melta weapons, anything with AP -4 or less. Against your typical last cannon or missile launcher, the Wraithlord is going to have pretty much the same save, so, you're going to have a 5+, unless you're in cover, in which case you'll have a 4+, which is better. So, oftentimes, against those types of weapons, it's just not going to be as good, right? The 5+ invul save is not going to be as useful, but against really high AP weapons at a short range, the Wraithseer does have that advantage. Okay. Oh, and it is a Psyker, so it will unfortunately suffer the negatives of being a Psyker. But other than that, it's a pretty good model. I think, again, going to be more relevant after the dataset comes out. And we start seeing more infantry. Okay, the Revenant Titan. So, the Revenant Titan is 1100 points. It is a very expensive model. It is really good, but it did suffer from the tower hit. So, it's not as good as it once was, and arguably it was never competitive. If we look at its abilities, it has Titanic Advance, so it can move over other models and terrain features 4 inches or less. When you target it with a stratagem, it costs double, so that kind of sucks, but it makes sense. It is, obviously Titan. And it can also just advance 8 inches just by itself, right? And the cool thing about it is most of its weapons are assault. So you can actually move this thing 24 inches and still shoot. It can't overwatch because it is Titanic, but you can still shoot with it. Now, my favorite weapon on this thing is the Sonic Lance. It has a very short range, but you're going to be advancing most of the time anyway, moving 24 inches. And it has D6 plus 6 attacks on that flamer. It is a flamer, it is a torrent weapon, so it's auto-hitting. It's essentially a star cannon with its stats. Strength 8, AP minus 3, damage 2 is going to punch through a lot of Marines. So, advancing this thing up the side of the board and just hosing down your opponent's backline units is a really effective way to use this thing, if you do want to use it. And of course, it has anti-monster 4+, and anti-vehicle 4+, so it's also good against vehicles and monsters. So pretty much a great weapon. I would pick up 2 of these. If you are running this for fun, definitely pick up 2 Sonic Lances. The Revenant Pulsar is okay. It's good against tough stuff, but it's really not great against anything else. So, 12 attacks is good, but doesn't do, it doesn't do a whole lot. I mean, this is a Bright Lance, right? I mean, Strength 14, a little bit harder hitting than a Bright Lance with AP minus 3, but if you think about it, for 1100 points, how many Bright Lances could you get for that cost? Probably quite a few. But yeah, it is good. Don't get me wrong, it is good. I just don't think it's as good as the Sonic Lance. Sonic Lance can do both. It can pull anti-large and anti-infantry duty pretty effectively because of how many attacks it gets. And the Revenant Pulsar is only really going to be able to be really effective against large targets. It can be effective against Terminator equivalents too, just because of the large amount of attacks it gets, but, it's going to struggle into some stuff. Especially with invul saves, right? And it needs to hit, so it needs to hit on 3+, so just consider that when you're taking this thing. It's good, but, for 1100 points, is this really a stat line that is going to be able to kill a Terminator unit? No, probably not. Right, just if you do a quick math hammer on it, 12 attacks, hitting on 3s, you're getting 9 hits, really 8 hits. Is more what you'll probably get. 8 hits, you do get a reroll, so, wounding on 2+, make it about 7 wounds. They're getting a 4+ invul save, so you may kill about 3 or 4 Terminators, which is good, but not for 1100 points, So yeah, the Revenant Titan, fun model, has a 4+ invul, very tough, actually. With Fortune, this thing could be really strong. So yeah, I think this could be fun in casual games, and very good in casual games, but in super competitive games, I think the raw points cost of this thing and the fact that your army's not going to have much else just means that it's not going to be as good as you think it is. Okay, so let's look at the Phantom Titan, which is its bigger cousin. So, basically kind of the same thing. I like to think of the Phantom Titan as like a Wraithknight on steroids. Has the D bombards, which are extremely effective, devastating wound weapons, 2d6 damage, strength 20, AP minus 4, insane, right? D6 attacks. But this thing is 2100 points. So the argument when the Wraithknight was good, and really still the same, right, is that even though the Phantom Titan is much tougher than the Wraithknight has comparable damage to it for much lower cost, even now, even after all the nerfs, right? So, you can also give the Phantom Pulsar, but again, these ranges are really meant for apocalypse battles, 120 range, 72 range. I mean, maybe not the 72, but 72 inches on a D weapon is pretty high. So yeah, this thing is really just meant, quite frankly, for apocalypse battles. It can shoot and declare a charge in a turn in which it fell back, which is useful, but again, it's not super great. Costs double to target with stratagems, but it can be targeted with stratagems. Now, something I want to mention is that it has the Wraith Construct keyword, and I think that means it can't actually be targeted by lightning fast reflexes, unfortunately. Same thing with the Phantom Titan, or same thing with the Revenant Titan, has the Wraith Construct keyword, so unfortunately that's just not going to do. Now, basically, fun model to use. You're not going to use it in regular games, but, a fun model to use in apocalypse games and stuff like that. Okay, let's move on to the Cobra. So the Cobra is the super heavy Eldar tank, comes with a D Impaler, which is really strong, but you are paying like 400 points for this thing, and the D Impaler doesn't have indirect fire, and it's a big model. The D Rift ability is why people would consider taking this. And it's good, don't get me wrong, but no opponent that's decent at the game is going to allow you to proc this ability on more than 2 units, right? And even then, if they see a Cobra on the battlefield and you explain its rule, they're probably going to make sure that units are outside of 3 inches of each other at the least, right? So basically roll a d6 when you target a unit. For every other unit within 3 inches of that, roll a d6. On a 5+, the unit suffers d3 mortal wounds. So that's good, but you're never going to get more than an extra unit with this unless you're facing somebody that's maybe a novice at the game, maybe bunches up his models in the corner or something like that. So, yeah, fun model. I think it's cool, but it's just kind of hard to, maneuver around and actually use. So I don't think it's competitive, but I do think it looks cool. And, its weapon, if it gets the fire, is pretty powerful. D6 plus 3, strength 16, AP minus 4, damage 4 shots is good. Just don't necessarily think it's that great. So that's the Cobra. The Scorpion has a twin Scorpion Pulsar instead of the D Impaler, basically on the same chassis though. Now something to mention about both the Cobra and the Scorpion is they're pretty tough. 24 wounds, 2+ armor save, 5+ invul is a tough profile, but they're only toughness 11. So, last cannons and stuff are still going to wound on 3s, and they're still, getting to that 5+ anyway, usually, because you have 2+ saves. So unless you're in cover, in which case you're getting a better save anyway. So it's 5+ invul, again, like the Wraithknight, or Wraithseer, good against melta weapons, good against high EP stuff, but really not useful against your typical anti-tank. It has the Lanced Obliteration, which makes models with the Deadly Demise ability proc it on a 4+ when it destroys it with the Scorpion Pulsar, which is pretty good, but it's not that good. Right? There's some situations where this could be useful, but again, Deadly Demise is usually only D6 on the bigger vehicles. So unless your opponent's rolling really unlucky and has all their stuff bunched up, this is just not going to be that effective. You might get a couple more mortal wounds out of this, but it's still only on a 4+, It's not like it's on a 2+ where it's guaranteed. It's only on a 4+. So really, I think this thing is fun. I think the Scorpion Pulsar, having 6 attacks that are twin linked at strength 18 at -3 and 5 damage is good. Again, twin linked is just, quite frankly, not as powerful on high strength units, right? You're going to be wounding on 3s anyway. You get that Eldar rerolled anyway. Twin linked isn't going to be that good. But, it's still fun. I think this is a fun model. I just don't think it's a objectively good model. Not that you can't have success with it in casual games. I just think it's also hard to maneuver around the battlefield as well. So that's Scorpion. The Nightwing, unfortunately, is just kind of like a worse Crimson Hunter. I hate to say it, guys, but it is. It has essentially the same stat line as a Crimson Hunter. It has an invul save just like Crimson Hunter. It has the hover ability, which is useful, but then it loses all of its bonuses for aircraft, including ignoring obscuring terrain. So yeah, you can start it off on the board and hide it and stuff, but it really doesn't have any firepower that makes it worth it, right? Twin Bright Lance, twin Shuriken Cannon. Who cares, right? The Crimson Hunter gets 2 Bright Lances and it gets a Pulse Laser. That's way better, and this thing does cost almost the same as a Crimson Hunter. So, obviously this is because it's a Forgeworld model. GW really doesn't sell a lot of these, except for, people who are buying it to collect them or just having something really cool on the battlefield, which it does look cooler than the Crimson Hunter. And this is what I would say. I would actually say if you want to play with the Nightwing and you really like the look of it, just say it's a Crimson Hunter. It's basically the same thing. Nobody's going to call you out on it in a casual setting. I would even go so far as to say in a, local semi-competitive tournament, they might not even call you on it then. And just say, hey, I'm proxying it because I love the model, and it's a Crimson Hunter. And, model it, obviously, with the 2 Bright Lances and the Pulse Laser instead of the Shuriken Cannon, right? So it is possible to do that. I would do it. But again, they call me Proxy Hammer for a reason. Most of my armies are made of cardboard when I try new things. Okay, it has the Interceptor special rule, though, which means that it gets +1 to hit against fly. Again, the Crimson Hunter gets +1 to hit and wound, so that's also better about the concept. So, straight up, I just think Crimson Hunter's a 1-for-1 upgrade from pretty much anything. Has better weapons, has a better special rule, and yeah. Anyway, Nightwing's cool, but worse Crimson Hunter in every way. The Warp Hunter. So the Warp Hunter is something that a lot of people were telling me about and saying, oh, do a review on the Warp Hunter. What do you think about the Warp Hunter? So I basically think that the Warp Hunter is kind of in the same place it was, even though despite, the nerfs that the Eldar got, we got Fire Prisms nerfed and we got a bunch of points increases, and the Warp Hunter didn't get increased that much. I think it's still 140. I still think the Warp Hunter is kind of not great, and here's why. Its weapon really isn't that strong. The D-Flail is 24 inches, attacks D3 plus skill 3, strength 12, AP -4. So at first you're like, oh man, this looks great. And then you see its damage. Damage 3. Damage 3 just isn't that good. And if you're going against Terminators, usually squad of 5, getting D3 plus 1 attacks, you'll probably get 3 attacks. All of them will probably hit, all of them will probably wound. You're forcing 3 invul saves. There's a 50% chance one of them's going to be a devastating. So 1 Terminator dead, maybe 1 more dead. 2 Terminators dead for 150 points a turn. Not great. Not great. And I think that, pulse lasers are actually much better at forcing kills on Terminators, and so are Bright Lances for the cost. So a Falcon can actually do a little bit more damage than this thing in shooting against Terminators, and you don't really want it against Terminators. And the other thing is, this weapon's just not good against vehicles, right? Like, damage 3, this low amount of attacks is terrible. If this had D6 attacks, I think this would be a contender, but it just doesn't. 24-inch range without indirect fire is also a huge blow. It means it needs to come really close to the enemy to be effective. The D-Flail, the Rift, has Torrent, which, again, it auto-hits, but it's range 12, my god, and yeah, it can Overwatch, but it only has D3 attacks, so it's not going to really do much, This thing is kind of like in that spot where it could be good if its weapons were just a little bit more powerful, it could be a contender, but the weapons just aren't strong enough. I think GW wanted to be careful with this thing to not make it OP, but at the same time, they kind of make it, they made the Wraithknight at the same time, so it was like, why couldn't you throw some love to the Warp Hunter? Why'd you have to pour it all into the Wraithknight and other models? Well, quite simply, probably because they wanted to sell Wraithknight models, and that's about it. Devastating Assault. Yeah, enemy needs to make a Battle Shock test. Again, I think I mentioned this, but it is good. It's just, again, this model is probably not going to be in a position to Battle Shock what you want to Battle Shock at all times, just because the range is so low. So yeah, it's a decent ability, but, it's a dime a dozen as far as what the ability does. There's so many other things that do this in the Eldar book for cheaper. The Void Weaver does this, right? And the Void Weaver is one of the more competitive models, so you can get a Void Weaver for the same cost as this. And arguably it's better, for less points. Okay, so that's the Warp Hunter. Not a huge fan, but I do think it's kind of cool. I love the model. Looks weird, but I like that. The Lynx is basically like the Warp Hunter, but a little bit bigger. It has a 5+ invul save, 16 wounds, and this makes it a little bit tougher than normal Eldar tanks. Now, the other thing about this is that it has some really cool weapons. The Lynx Pulsar has Assault, range 48, attacks 4, hits on 3+4, strength 16, AP -3, damage d6. That is pretty powerful. Now, oftentimes a strength 16 is redundant against most vehicles, except anything toughness 8, or below, but D6 damage. So it's basically a stronger Pulsar, that has Assault. Now, the Assault is important because it has this ability, Speed of All, so it gets to advance 9 inches automatically, putting it up to 24 inches. Or, excuse me, 23 inches. So it moves 23 inches, and it can shoot afterward. It can shoot its Lynx pulsar afterward, which is really good, right? So this makes it, able to, get into spots and firing lanes that your opponent doesn't expect and blast a large target with it. Now, having said that, if your opponent has any sort of invul save, it's just not going to do the damage you think it's going to do, right? And it can't fire the Bright Lance if it advances because the Bright Lance doesn't have the Assault Cannon. Now, the Lynx is good. It's a little bit bigger than the normal Wave Serpent or Falcon, though, so you will have harder times maneuvering it, which is actually the problem I found with it. When proxying it and using its dimensions, I found that it was hard to fit through certain spaces in our normal battlefield. So the Lynx, I think, is good. A lot of people said it was going to be a replacement of the Fire Prism, but yet we haven't seen it. I just think that's because, quite frankly, even though it has the damage that the Fire Prism does, it still has that same problem. It's expensive, a little bit more durability, but it's not enough to help it survive, and it is bigger and it is harder to hide. So I think that's one of the reasons why we're not seeing it in competitive play. Why do we see Fire Prisms in competitive play sometimes if we don't see Lynxes? Well, because if you actually put a Lynx on the table and not just look at it on paper, it's kind of awkward. So I think that's why, it's just a little bit too big to hide. And that's its main problem. I think obviously if it had a smaller profile, it would be a lot better. But yeah, that's the Lynx. Okay, the Hornet. So the Hornet is obviously one of the most competitive units in Forgeworld, shared with Shadow Spectres. So why is this competitive? Well, if you look at its stats, it's just durable enough to survive some decent indirect fire with 8 wounds. Now, the funniest thing about this is it doesn't have the -1 to wound that the Warwalker has, but because it has wounds 8, it actually makes it a little bit more durable against damage 3 weapons who now need to pour a little bit extra into it. So, if you're going against Imperial Guard and you're going against Manticores or Basilisks, with either damage 2 or damage 3, that's going to be a damage breakpoint. They're probably going to have to shoot 2 of those units, or maybe even 3 if you use lightning fast reflexes on this thing at it to kill it. And, if you can waste your opponent's firepower in the first turn and your opponent's only killing 100 points with its indirect fire, that's a success. Right? And I said this kind of in my guard video where I went over Imperial Guard and talked about the ways to beat them. If you can force them to waste more firepower on something than they want to waste, then that's a success, even if the Hornet still dies. So yeah, the wounds 8 and the toughness 7. The toughness 7 doesn't really help much, but the wounds 8 definitely does against those types of indirect fire weapons. Its ability, Lightning Assault, means that it can move over enemy units, and for each 4+, you get a mortal wound. So this isn't really good to be used offensively, and I wouldn't use it like this, right? I would actually use it defensively in the later game to sweep enemies out of the area that it's in and try to kind of, stop models from getting into your backline. So if an enemy unit does get into your backlines and start sweeping through, you can use this ability and kill them. Now, actually, it's funny because I've run a few games where I've had a couple of these against my Marine buddy who runs Ultramarines. He loves, running the Inceptors, the big jetpack guys. And what I do is when he moves them into position and he, tries to kill my Shadow Spectres or tries to kill my, Swooping Hawks or whatever, I just use these to move over the unit. And then I tank shock. Because it's a vehicle, you can tank shock. So you're doing 12 mortal, rolling 12 dice, you're doing about 6 mortal wounds to that unit. And then they really can't do anything. And if you shoot them as well, they're dead. So you can use Hornets defensively as well. And you don't have to necessarily, you don't have to necessarily use the Bright Lances to sweep off a small unit of something that's trying to get into your backlines. And I think they're called Inceptors, but again, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments if they're not actually called Inceptors. The ones that deep strike within 3 inches, the green ones, let me know. They're the big boys with the jump packs. Okay, So that's the Hornet. I think the biggest draw to this, again, is that you can take 2 Bright Lances on it for 100 points, and it is fast. It is a pretty good platform for that. Okay, Shadow Spectres. So this is obviously the most competitive unit in the whole roster, and it's used quite frequently in competitive lists. And the reason why this thing is so good is because its Prism Rifle has a really good damage profile, and it's good against both infantry and tough targets, Terminator equivalents. So usually when something has a dual profile, both profiles are less effective than something else, right? But if you look at this unit's profile, that's actually not the case. So the Prism Rifle, the dispersed version, is range 18, tax D6 with blast. Strength 4, AP -1, damage 1. That's great at clearing things like infantry blobs and stuff like that. The Prism Rifle, the focus shot, is 24 range, 1 shot. Strength 6, AP -2, damage 3. So it's really good against Terminators. So this unit has 2 very effective profiles against 2 different target types, which makes it extremely valuable to have. And because of the fact that it's only 95 points for the unit, and the unit gets to move after shooting, I mean, that's a no-brainer. A lot of people are going to take this unit because it's just so good in competitive play. You know, being able to deal with infantry or heavy infantry is a really good tool to have. And most Eldar units don't really do that well, right? Like if you look at Dire Avengers are solid against hordes. They're solid against tougher infantry like mech equivalents. But as soon as you get up to Terminators, you know, you might have trouble because you only have AP -1 in your weapons. And yeah, you have lethal hits and stuff, but you know, you're going to be giving your opponent a 3+ save, or if they're in cover, a 2+ save still. So that's not that great. Whereas this, you know, if they're in cover, they're only really getting a 3+, and, you know, they're popping a Terminator on every roll of 3+. Or if they're not in cover, it's a 4+, they're forcing them to their info save. So Shadow Spectres, very good unit, and they come with Stealth and Deep Strike, which is also really good. So Deep Strike means they can come into reserve, so if you're scared of indirect fire or something like that, you can have these guys in reserve. But if you keep them on the board, they also have Stealth, so if an opponent is able to ignore the indirect fire penalty somehow, either through an order or through just, you know, having the heavy profile, whatever it is, Stealth gives them that -1 still, so they're going to be hitting on a worse result. Which again, just like the Hornet, often means that the damage parameters needed to kill that unit are going to be higher. So, you know, how many Basilisks are you going to need to kill a unit of these guys? Well, probably 3, unless your opponent rolls really good, right? If they're getting D6 plus 3 attacks apiece, on average they're getting 7 attacks, so 3 of them is 21, they're hitting on 4+. Well, the first one would get +1 to its attack, so 22, right, because of blast. So 22 hitting on 4s, 11 hits, wounding on 2s, probably about 9 wounds. Well, guess what, guys? If we're in cover against Basilisks, we're going to be getting, because we have a 3+ save, we're going to be getting a 4+. So the invul doesn't really matter, but we're going to be getting a 4+ against that, even with Fields of Fire. So if they do Fields of Fire, it's -3, which would put us up to our invul, so, you know, 5+ in that case. But even so, right, like, that's going to take 3 Basilisks to eliminate this unit. It's going to take 3 Basilisks to do that. And that's a lot of points. Your opponent is spending 400 points to kill a unit of Shadow Spectres. So, you know, I know a lot of you are afraid of indirect fire out there, but these guys can actually survive pretty well against that type of stuff. And yes, your opponent will think of that as a good trade, you know, 3 Basilisks for a single unit of Shadow Spectres, but that's okay, you know. You can still lose Shadow Spectres, and, you know, you can have another unit of them, or you can have other things in your army that can deal with it. And then that way, they're not shooting your other units. You know, you probably have Warp Spiders, you probably have some other stuff too in your list. Okay, so Shadow Spectres, really good, obviously. Really fantastic. The Skathach Wraithknight is, in my opinion now, a better Wraithknight. It's just, you know, it has the profile that we need, I think, going forward, and that is the Death Shroud Cannon, which has devastating wounds, anti-infantry, so it's basically just a big warp spider. Think about it like a huge warp spider who can kill mech targets as well as light infantry targets. Strength 6, AP -1, wow. That's really good against light infantry. You know, orcs and stuff like that just absolutely obliterates them. It has 3d6 attacks on it. Doesn't have Torrent, but again, probably doesn't need it. Hits on 3s. Throw Guide Up on this thing, and this thing is going to town on basically anything. Once per game, it can Skyleap as well and has Deep Strike. So, not that you're going to Deep Strike always, but it is useful to have. It's harder to screen out. And, of course, it has the Agile ability. So, just like Titanic, Revenant Titans, it can move over terrain features that are 4 or less in height, as if they were there, and other models as well. Pretty terrible in close combat. It does have the option to take a Scatter Shield. I would never actually take this thing, though, to be honest. I would always just give it 2 Deathshroud Cannons. I don't think you should ever give it a Scatter Shield. Unless it's already equipped with a Scatter Shield. Let's see. Yeah. Don't give it the Scatter Shield. Definitely give it the 2 Deathshroud Cannons. That's the best way to do it. So you have 2 Deathshroud Cannons on this thing, just absolutely obliterates infantry. So the Inferno Lance might seem like a good option on this thing, but in my experience, it just does nothing that a Bright Lance can do, right? I mean, it has Melt to 2, which means within 12, it's going to have the same damage profile as a Bright Lance, and it just has 1 more AP than a Bright Lance. It has a lot more attacks. But, again, you're paying like 400, 500 points for this thing. I just don't see it, It needs to be really close to the enemy to be able to, really do some damage to large targets. And we already have a bunch of anti-large in our army. What we don't have is solid anti-infantry like this with devastating wounds. And Blast, too. I mean, Blast gives it extra attacks, of course. So, and like I said, with those Imperial Guard blobs, I mean, oh my god, this thing just absolutely obliterates them. Wounds on 2s, Blast is getting a bunch of extra attacks per cannon. AP -1, strength 6. It's just insane. So I do like the Skathach Wraithknight. I actually think it's going to be better in the meta going forward as well. Not that it's... Okay, so just a disclaimer, though. It still suffers from that huge towering nerf, so I don't think it's going to be as good, but I still think it is pretty good, right? It's pretty good. Devastating wounds with 3-6 attacks. It's good. It's a solid model, has solid weaponry. Just probably not the best, most efficient use of points. Okay, the last unit in the Forgeworld lineup is Irillyth. Now, a lot of people like Irillyth, a lot of people have the model, but unfortunately it sucks in the game. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't play it. If you have it, definitely play it. It's a fun model. But it sucks, and it doesn't really do a lot for the Shadow Spectres. Being able to force Battle Shock or leadership tests at a -1 within 6 inches is one of the worst abilities I've ever seen. Even the Hemlock Wraithfire, which is not a good model, and still has that same ability, has a longer range, has 9 inches. Shadow of Death is just not really going to do much. It gives +1 to hit to the unit, and I think the saving grace of Irillyth is that it has he or she, I don't really know which it is, male or female. It doesn't really matter for Aspect Warriors. But, 3 attacks at Strength 8, AP -2, Damage 4. That's a good profile. That's a good profile. That's like, 2 more Strength and 2 more attacks over the Focused Prism. Prism shot of the Shadow Spectres. So it's pretty good. It has an extra damage as well. That does make it kind of awkward against stuff, but it does also mean you can threaten light vehicles. So it is decent. And this thing is 105 points now, but there's just so much better stuff for 105 points, For 105 points, I could have a Warlock and 2 Bright Lances. And I'm getting way more firepower out of that against large targets. So I just really don't think Irillyth's great. It doesn't have any abilities that really shine or stand out. So my advice on this thing is, if you want to be competitive, don't take it. But if you want to just have fun, definitely take it. Put it with a unit of Shadow Spectres. Allowing that unit to hit on 2s does make it more powerful against, with its anti-infantry shots, does make it more reliable. So that is good. And again, Spirit Twilight's powerful, but just not like super great. I think if the Spirit Twilight had like a dual firing mode, that would be really cool. If it had this as one of its firing modes, but its other firing mode was like, 3d6 attacks or 2d6 attacks and, strength 6, AP -1, I think that would be a lot better. So unfortunately it doesn't have that though. I don't know why it doesn't have a split profile, but it really should. It really should. Okay. So that's it for the Forgeworld units. I hope this was a little bit informative. These are just my kind of like off-the-wall opinions on each unit. This is nothing like, prepared. But I've run pretty much all of these in some way or another. There is a couple I haven't run. Obviously, I have not run either of the Titans in games. I haven't run the Nightwing because I just never saw a need to, even for fun. It just doesn't seem fun to me to use. And really, here's why. It doesn't have anything special, right? It doesn't really have anything special that's super cool, It's described, look at this description, okay? The Nightwing is a superlative dogfighting aircraft. Its swept-wing design granting it a combination of lightning speed and aerobatic agility unmatched by its rivals. Appearing only as a momentary blur in the sights of adversaries on the ground, the Nightwing streak through the skies like born predators, vanquishing their quarry with a hail of shurikens or a single, well-priced bright lance strike. And it's like, okay, well, then you expect it to be extremely precise. Maybe it hits on 2+ or something like that against all targets and not just flyers. But it doesn't, and it's twin-linked, and it's like, okay, it doesn't have the firepower. Really doesn't have the maneuverability either. It's the same as any other vehicle. It doesn't have any special rules that help it maneuver better on the battlefield. It just doesn't have anything that's special, right? So, yeah, this description is really cool and stuff, and I remember Nightwings were super cool in like the Dawn of War games and stuff, but it's just not good. It's not a good model, and it doesn't seem fun to play. So there is that. Okay. So what else about this thing, right? Yeah, that's basically it. So that's my thoughts on the Forgeworld units. So I hope you guys enjoyed that review. And as always, if you want to join and support the channel, you can join our channel's Patreon, which is essentially has free trials activated, and a free trial will grant you permanent access to our Discord community, which is a community of Eldar players and enthusiasts who like talking about strategies, tactics, and of course hobby. And I'll go ahead and leave that in the description for you guys. I am quite active on Discord. And if you want to talk to me about anything, if you want the chance to talk to me about tactics and strategies and stuff like that with the Eldar, I'm more than happy to give you my time. I also have a channel store page, which, kind of has some Eldar-inspired apparel on it. There's some meme kind of stuff, and there's also just some, basic Eldar designs on there. Eldar-inspired designs you can, pick up to rep at your local game store. And I am also an Amazon affiliate, so if you want to grab some discounted Eldar miniatures on Amazon, that does help out the channels. I think I get like a couple cents or something like that if you purchase something on Amazon. It's not much, but it helps the channel and helps it grow and stuff like that. So if you do want to support that way, that would be fantastic. Alright everybody, that is going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching. Again, let me know what you think of these live videos. I really appreciate the feedback on it. I know, again, I realize I made some blunders in the videos, but I feel like that's more authentic anyway. It's not a pre-recorded video. It's not something that, I've edited. So let me know what you guys think about it. And yeah, have a great and Merry Christmas, everybody. Have a good one, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.